And really, this book is geared towards anybody who loves America, who loves the founding principles that this nation stands for, who thinks we should have, a strong nuclear family, we should have free markets, we should be producing a lot of energy, right? These are things that generally they are associated with conservatism, free speech, property rights. Because unfortunately, the left has kind of strayed away from the founding principles of America. It really is. It's for anybody who loves America but doesn't quite understand Bitcoin.
I wrote The Bible and Bitcoin for you, Bible-believing Christian. And in it, I lay out the biblical basis for what money is, why our current fiat monetary system is ungodly, and how Bitcoin is the best and most viable, biblically compliant replacement for government fiat money. There's even a small group study guide in the back with additional resources to study with your church small group. Get it on Amazon or pay with Bitcoin at thebibleandbitcoin.com for a discount. Welcome to another episode of the Bible and Bitcoin podcast. I'm your host, Alin Armstrong, aka Pastor Coin, and today I have the privilege of interviewing the author of the new book, The Conservative Case for Bitcoin, Hard Money and the Restoration of Traditional American Values by Mitchell Askew. And I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So, first and foremost, I like to start mostly every episode, by asking our guest what their journey to the Lord was. Tell us a little bit about how you came to follow Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's absolutely the best question to start off with. So I grew up going to church, grew up in a Baptist church. Very much it was cultural Christianity, right? You go with your family and your friends are there and stuff. And I never really took it too seriously until I got older. In high school, I was actively involved with the church, reading my word all the time and really taking it seriously. And there's this alarming stat out there that something like 90% of Christians leave the faith when they go to college. And when I first got to college, I was adamant about not being a part of that statistic. So for the first semester, I was on fire for the Lord, always in the Word, always, going to getting involved in the local church and everything. But slowly but surely, the temptations of the world began to overcome me for a while. And so there's probably a 2 or 3 year period there where I was living lukewarm. I never outright rejected the gospel, but I certainly wasn't walking with the Lord. And, it says in 1 John, who's walking with the Lord by the way they're acting. And so it wasn't until late 2021, going into 2022, that I actually began to follow Christ truly and listen to his word and obey him. And it stemmed from a fear of the end time. So if you flash back to 2020, we had COVID and all this madness. My trust in systems was diminishing. The whole world just sort of stopped on a dime, right? You saw how quickly things can really change. And then in 2021, there was all these vaccine mandates, and this was being pushed on us everywhere from every angle, all across culture and media. There was all this talk about, you're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z unless you get this vaccine. And to me, that reeked of the mark of the beast. And so out of a fear that we were in the end times, maybe near the tribulation, that's when I started to really take the Lord seriously. And nowadays, I'm not sure that's actually what that was, but we should be living for Christ regardless of it. This is the end times or not. And so that was definitely a pivotal moment for me in coming back to the Lord. And so the last 2 or 3 years, I've been taking it seriously and staying in the Word on a consistent basis and diving deeper into theology and getting involved in my local church and everything. So it's been a huge blessing for me.
That's great to hear. And you always love to hear when young guys come to the Lord young and don't have to go through their 20s and 30s and make an even bigger mess of their life. So praise the Lord that he
right.
got you young. Now,
I can only imagine, right? I lived lukewarm and degenerate for about 2 or 3 years, and it feels like it took such a toll on me. I can only imagine living that way for a decade plus.
Yeah, there are consequences for sure, and the Lord can save and redeem you, but sometimes those lingering residual consequences of habitual sin over decades, a lot of times they don't go away. You just have to suffer those consequences. I want to ask, in light of that timeline, did Bitcoin play any part in that coming back to the Lord?
I do think so, because Bitcoin really, this desire to stack as many sats as possible. I found Bitcoin late 2020, early 2021 going to the bull market, and I quit my degenerate ways out of a desire to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. I stopped smoking weed, I stopped drinking, stopped partying, and I really just locked in and focused on Bitcoin. And a few months later, after sort of living a more responsible life, is when I started to really follow the Lord. So the timeline there is conspicuous, and I used to say that Bitcoin sort of led me to Christ, and in a way it did, but I do, like, a personal, I guess, struggle of mine is not making an idol out of Bitcoin, right? Because I work in Bitcoin, I'm always thinking about it. I wrote a Bitcoin book. Like, it is something I'm passionate about, and it fixes worldly problems, but I don't want to idolize it too much to say that, like, Bitcoin is why I'm a Christian, because it's not. It's the gospel, and it's what Jesus did on the cross. But there's definitely, obviously, strong ties, and you wrote about that in your book as well. So it's I don't think Bitcoin pushes anybody towards degeneracy, right? Having something that is sound and honest and true, it's gonna only push you closer to the gospel. But ultimately, like, the gospel is what convicts hearts and changes people.
Yeah, I often say that Bitcoin doesn't really lead people to Christ. It sort of just shows them that an objective truth exists. And once you realize that, especially living a life where in a fiat world, everything is so subjective, and people say silly things like objective truth doesn't exist, which in itself is a statement of objective truth. So it's kind of self-refuting. But once you get out of that clown world, self-refuting sort of mind, and you see, oh, Bitcoin, this thing's an objective truth, it doesn't change, it's just kind of math and code, and then it does oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes lead people to think, well, if this is true, what else is true? So I can definitely see that.
100%.
Now, moving on to not quite your book yet, but along the same lines, most Christians I know are generally conservative in their political views, but as I've noticed, especially in Canada, and it's happening in the United States too, that the mainstream conservative movement is becoming increasingly less godly, increasingly less, at least their policies are moving away from biblical conservatism. So I want to ask you, why did you choose, you're a Christian, you're a conservative, you're a Bitcoiner, why did you choose to target this audience of conservatives, as your book says, the conservative case for Bitcoin? Why did you choose to target this audience with the message, or with the, I don't want to say message of Bitcoin, because it's not like a message, but with this idea of Bitcoin?
Great question. And I'll preface by, you hit on a great point there, that the right-wing conservatives have always been associated with Christianity, but they're absolutely going away from that recently. I mean, look at who's been popularized on the right. You've got Hawk Tuah Girl, you've got the Tate brothers, who are, online pimps. You've got just all sorts of sort of degenerate figures in the right. You even listen to, like, most popular country music, it's about, like, getting drunk and fornication and everything. So definitely you can, like, obviously we can see the left they're not Christian, right? They don't proclaim to be either. And the right doesn't really appear to be so either for the most part. But on your question, why did I target conservatives? Well, one, that's something I understood more, is like the conservative viewpoint of the world. So before I got into Bitcoin, I was heavily into right-wing politics. That was a lot of the content I consumed, books I read, things I thought about and wrote about. And so having that sort of background in terms of my philosophical journey, I guess you could say, I felt poised to make the argument using that framework. And two, I wanted something that I could use to orange pill a lot of people in my life. So living in the South, it's very conservative, obviously, and I wanted something I could give to a conservative that appeals to their pre-existing worldview, right? Because I can hand someone the Bitcoin standard, but they may or may not even open it, right? Because it's just completely different than what they know, right? They don't understand anything about this Bitcoin thing. But if I can just title and cover alone be like, hey, I agree with basically 90% of how you view the world, here's something that you should add into kind of your understanding, because Bitcoin really is aligned with core American principles. And something I I don't necessarily regret the title, but I do sometimes think maybe I should have titled it The American Case for Bitcoin, because I've given this to people on the left, and they agree with a lot of what's in it, and they say it's a great resource. And really, this book is geared towards anybody who loves America, who loves the founding principles that this nation stands for, who thinks we should have, a strong nuclear family, we should have free markets, we should be producing a lot of energy, right? These are things that generally they are associated with conservatism, free speech, property rights. Because unfortunately, the left has kind of strayed away from the founding principles of America. Not all of them, but sort of the mainstream radical vocal left. And so it really is, it's for anybody who loves America but doesn't quite understand Bitcoin. It's a beginner level book, right? If you've been in Bitcoin for 10 years, you don't need to read my book. You're not going to necessarily gain any profound insights from it. Maybe you will. You definitely will, and you should go buy it for $17.76 on Amazon. But it's definitely for people with no little understanding, but they're conservative and they love America. And it's been successful in orange pilling a lot of people from, people friends from college, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, like literally anybody who's picked up this book, didn't know anything about Bitcoin. They're hitting me up like, hey, I'm starting to dollar cost average. This makes a lot of sense. So I've seen a lot of success with it so far as sort of an orange pilling resource.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Let's jump into some of the material here. Chapter 3 is called Bitcoin Bankrupts Big Government. And as I was reading it, by the way, it's an entertaining book too. I mean, you got some funny memes in there. I don't know if it's focusing, but look, it's like on one page you got a chart, you're learning, and then next thing you know, you're busting your gut because you got a funny meme. So
that was inspired by your book, because you put a meme in yours. So I'm like, well, if he's doing it, like, this is obviously the way to go. It's like, so thank you for that.
There's more. So anyways, so chapter 3, Bitcoin Bankrupts Big Government. And when I read that title, I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. But the question I suppose that would come out of that is, from somebody that may not agree, is why, first of all, why is big government a problem, and how does Bitcoin exactly bankrupt it?
Yeah, great question. So big government is a problem if you are a conservative, right? So in this book, I don't necessarily try to argue why big government is an issue, because anybody reading this book generally agrees. But for the sake of this conversation, individuals should be making their decisions, right? They are the most informed about their life. And in the book, I do explore this a little bit in terms of centrally planned markets, planned by the government, and the free market, right? So let's imagine a widget factory. Who understands like the real economic inputs of that more in terms of, bolts and energy usage and how much you need to produce and the cost of all the inputs and the labor? Who understands that more? Some guys in suits in Washington, D.C., or the general manager of the widget factory who's in there every day, right? When you try to centrally plan the production of goods and services in an economy, you're going to be way off from what you would otherwise get under the free market, right? The free market's going to be a lot closer to, boots on the ground and know exactly how much to allocate towards the production, right? Because if the central planners say, oh, we need to produce 1 billion of the widgets, right? But really society only demands a certain amount, you're going to have all this capital misallocation. And so big government, especially in terms of economics, there's roles for government. I'm not libertarian, like I'm a conservative. I do think the state should play some role in society, but generally speaking, the state has far overstepped its bounds in America in 2024. So Bitcoin.
Let me give you, before you go into why Bitcoin or how Bitcoin does this, let me give you an example that will lend credence to your point here. In Canada, the government put a bunch of money into building vaccine factories. I don't know, they're not called manufacturing centers, right, where they make these vaccines. They put all this money to produce all these vaccines that now they have to literally throw in the garbage because the demand for the vaccines plummeted while the supply artificially kept going up because the government just... So anyways, right.
And there's in a free market, entrepreneurs who make bad decisions like that, they get punished. They lose money, right? The prices serve as a signal to say, hey, you should make more of this or make less of this. And so manipulated money distorts those signals. And so we, for the most part in America and in Canada too, you don't have a whole lot of central planning, but you have central planning at the most important industry, which is money itself, because that touches every industry, money and the cost of money. So it causes all sorts of problems. And that's actually chapter 2 of my book, which segues well into, all right, so Bitcoin is the solution here, because Bitcoin can effectively handcuff government spending, right? When you look at usdebtclock.org, right now the government's running some $2 trillion annual deficit. So what does that mean? It means they're spending $2 trillion that they don't have. So they bring in X amount in tax revenue, quote unquote, because taxation is theft. And in under a hard money. Well, I definitely agree with that sentiment. Yeah. Maybe some of it's necessary. Anyways, besides the point, they can spend more than they actually bring in because they have a money printer. And so Bitcoin gets rid of that money printer. And an analogy I use in the book, and I think this is very appealing to conservatives, is the go woke, go broke idea, right? So we've seen financial boycotts work in the past. So it dates the time I was writing this book, but I referenced the Bud Light scenario. So Bud Light put a not popular figure and ideology on their cans, and conservatives and Bud Light drinkers stopped buying the beer. And Bud Light's Anheuser-Busch stock, it dropped something like 30% in the months that followed. Their sales were through the floor. Like, it was bad. And we've actually seen Bud Light capitulate since then, right? They've rejected that partnership, and they've started partnering with the UFC and some other sort of more masculine or conservative right-leaning groups. And so financial boycotts work. Conservatives understand this. And so if you don't like what's going on in Washington, D.C., you don't agree with all the money they're sending to foreign nations, the welfare programs they're funding, vaccine manufacturing, Fauci studying in Wuhan, like all this stuff that you don't agree with the government spending money on, then you should boycott them. You should not be holding dollars. You should not be buying treasury bonds in your retirement account. You should be holding Bitcoin.
Yes. Beautifully said. Let's move on to let's jump to chapter 6. There is a paragraph here I'd like to read. Chapter 6, I'm just looking, yeah. So, is that the one?
Fiat money destroyed the nuclear family. That's chapter 6.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to edit all that out. Let's just start over. All right, let's move on to chapter 6. I want to read a quote here that I highlighted and then ask a question in light of that. So you write here, under increased cost of living, perpetual devaluation of the dollar has turned America into a nation of dual income households. It is hardly possible for someone to earn an average income to support their family. Both spouses must work in order to satisfy the basic living needs of a family. The nuclear family was once the glue of American society, with the husband/father as the breadwinner and the wife/mother taking care of the home and raising the children. Because a single average income can no longer afford basic living costs, shelter, food, gas, clothes, etc., would-be stay-at-home mothers have had to join the workforce, and the children are sent to government schools where they spend 8 to 10 hours a day being raised by the states. That is a rather unpleasant paragraph in reality that we're living in. In the chapter, you also say that fiat money is the silent assassin of the nuclear family. My question is, why do you think the Christian church hasn't been able to identify fiat money, that silent assassin, as one of the pillars of nuclear family degradation?
Reason one,
Go ahead.
I would say because they're dealing with the fallout, right? So they are more focused, the church and everyone in society, they are more high time preference, right? Because they can't save for the future. They're now so focused on paying bills because fiat has devalued their money and it's devalued their time. So they don't have as much time to dig into what's causing these bad problems, and because they're just dealing with the problems, right? So it's a lack of time to be actually like dig into what's going on here. And second is, the more sort of popular reason is to just simply blame feminism, and obviously that's sort of been a toxic ideology, but it's not necessarily as as palatable or intuitive to disagree with that as being the main culprit, and instead point the finger at fiat money. It's a lot easier to just blame culture and society and sort of these more abstract reasons versus saying, hey, objectively, fiat money printing has devalued our money, it's devalued our time, and it's forced us to work more to provide sort of the same quality of life. And in this chapter, I reference my grandfather, who worked a basic normal job at a factory in a small town in the South. And he was able to support 4 kids, buy a car, buy a house, like all this stuff. Great, a modern American dream, the life, right? And this was in the 60s and 70s. And my grandmother was able to stay at home and raise the children. And so nowadays, you can't do that working an average job, right? And as men, I think we should seek to be above average. We should try to go out and increase our skill set, increase our income so we can offer that life to our family. But by definition, most people are average or below average. So that's not going to be the case for a lot of people. And that's, now the state is raising far more children than the family. And so that's obviously had negative consequences. And those negative consequences are going to continue unless people get on a Bitcoin standard.
Your family, your nation, and your world needs strong men. The devil wants men weak, emasculated, and addicted to porn. This is why I designed the Slaying the Beast course to help men take back the dominion porn stole from them. This course will help you discover your identity as God's image, how porn leverages and twists that against you, and how with God's help you can turn the tables on the beast and live free. There's also access to a Discord server where you can have fellowship with others in the fight. You do not have to wait any longer to conquer this beast once and for all. Go to lifegiverchurch.net to get started today. Yeah, that's interesting. You're almost forced to become above average or drown in this environment. And as you're talking, I was reminded of modern medicine and in light of the church, because it's like in modern medicine, you come in with a symptom and they just want to treat the symptom, right? They don't want to go to the underlying cause. Well, why are you feeling this way? What's happening in your body that's causing it to react like this? Let's fix the underlying root problem, and that way all your symptoms will be dealt with. Right. And it's kind of the same way in the church, right? It's like, well, you have the family degrading and families are struggling and there's divorce and the 2-income households are barely making it now and all this kind of stuff. So instead of asking what is the root, we just want to cover up the symptoms. But that, as you know, usually just makes people more sick and doesn't really get to the root cause of the problem.
Yeah, it really does. You touched on a good point there too. It does force us to become above average or drown. I like the way you phrased that. And when you look, if you go to WTFhappened in1971.com, there's all these charts that illustrate a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, basically. The top 1%, the top 10%, and everybody else, they're just going apart like this. And people point fingers at all sorts of different things, right? The people on the left will blame capitalism, oh, greedy capitalists. And then people on the right will blame, oh, it's the government's fault, which in a way is sort of true. But really the culprit is the Federal Reserve. Let's get specific. The culprit is fiat money and the Federal Reserve. And it does force, this separation between those who understand the game that's being played. And like, it is a game, we have to play it. You have to buy assets to protect yourself against the perpetual devaluation of the dollar. But most people don't understand that, because studying money and studying financial markets is a full-time job in a sense. And so people are working their own full-time job already. They're not as interested. They're not nerds like us. So when they're home from work, they're watching football, they're going fishing, they're doing all this stuff. They're not reading books about the Federal Reserve and understanding, what's actually going on here and why is the nuclear family getting separated? Why does it cost way more to buy a house now than in the past? So that's definitely forces people to level up their game if they want to survive in this environment.
Yeah, you either level up or you do unethical things, right? I mean,
right.
It's becoming even harder to earn enough money to give yourself like a basic middle class life that like my father gave me. And my father is an unskilled worker. We immigrated to this country. He didn't even know English, and within a very short period of time, he had a job where he didn't even need to know how to speak English. He worked on a line in some factory, and within a couple of years of that, we bought a house. It didn't take very long to do that.
Right.
Now, good luck. Good luck. That's not the reality anymore. And like you said, it is a result of the Federal Reserve, or in my case, the Bank of Canada, and just the fiat money proliferation.
Right. And that's a key point to hammer down too, is most people, they wait to start a family because they want to buy a house, right? They want that security of, oh, I'm not going to have to move. This is a good place to raise my children. And because it takes so much longer to actually save up for a down payment and buy real estate, you're seeing this delay in when people actually start to have kids. And so that's a cause. It's caused by fiat money, right? That fiat's the root there. But the problem is it's more difficult to get that first home. And thus you're seeing people put off the family.
It's almost like, and this thought just popped in my mind, and I think it's true. It's almost like feminism is inflation cope or fiat cope, because women want to have children. Women want to get married. You know, there's that meme. I don't know, maybe you're too young for this, but back when I was in high school and, you know, young adult age, there was this meme, wasn't on the internet, but, you know, just how memes work, that the woman wanted the man to propose real quick. Right? I don't know if you remember that Beyonce song about
if you like it, then you should have put a ring on it.
If you like, yeah, exactly. If you like it, then you should have put a ring on it. So there was this like push of young women to the men to be like, hey, man up and give me a ring and marry me. Why?
Right.
So we can have a family. So I can do what my genetics are, you know, pushing me to do, which is to get pregnant. But and of course feminism was around back then, but we have like an even more insidious feminism today, where the women are almost having to cope with this by saying, I don't want children at all. I could be independent. I don't need a man at all. It's like, well, I don't know if you even believe that. And I believe that if a man came to a woman like that and said, hey, I'm financially secure, I want to marry you and have kids with you, the feminism would just be raptured out of her body in an instant, and she would be all over that lifestyle. So it does seem like inflation and fiat money, or feminism, is a sort of inflation cope that women have almost taken upon themselves as a defense mechanism.
That's a great idea.
But anyways, yeah.
I think there's merit to that. And I agree that, I mean, whether they admit to it or not, I think most women want that. And I think most men want that too. Like, who doesn't want to have a family? It's the most fulfilling sort of activity you can have on this earth. It's as close to heaven as we'll get, is to spend high quality time with your family. And if you look at some of the feminists who say I don't want that, a lot of them have like sugar daddies, right? And so it's sort of a knockoff version of a husband, right? You don't actually get that empathetic, you know, man that really cares about you. Obviously, he's spreading his seed amongst many women, but they get the financial security from that. And so it's sort of this coping version of having a family, is like a sugar daddy.
Or if they don't have that, they have a bunch of cats, which are
too.
Which are a poor replacement of children. I mean, the women just need to care for women need to care for a vulnerable living being. It's how they were made, right? Genesis 1 tells us humans were made to be fruitful and multiply. That's like you said, it's the most fulfilling thing you do because it's coded in your DNA. That's how God made you. That's what you're
absolutely.
So,
and on the male side of that, like, men need to be responsible, right? And fiat money, this inability to really take on the ultimate responsibility, which is to serve a wife and to raise children. Men have neglected that, and they've just turned to easy sources of dopamine, right? Video games, pornography, marijuana, alcohol, like all this stuff, rather than really getting that true fulfillment, which is to bear the burden and take care of other people.
Yeah, and you know, for a lot of guys, they want to do that, but they become demoralized because it seems that their efforts are never enough.
Right.
With inflation and the debasement of money, they go, man, I'm working my butt off, I'm killing myself, but it doesn't seem to be, like, I'm almost going backwards now. And
Right.
unless you have a really strong resolve, most guys will eventually just cave in on themselves and say, what's the point of even trying? Because there's this thing working against me that I cannot overcome. And they just get, and a lot of them just give up. Now, people can say, don't give up, be a man. But the reality is, a lot will. Okay, that's just the fact. A lot will, and it's going to have cascading consequences, not just for them, but if they do have children, for those children, and it just becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy and causes generational despair.
Right.
So, yeah, I know a lot of people will say, man, come on, it's not really, money's not that consequential on our lives, but it is. It is. Look at the statistics and look at where we are now.
It's the manifestation of human energy, right? It's our time and energy. That's the sum of that is our labor. And so when your labor is constantly being devalued, there's only so much you can out labor that, right? If inflation were mild, 1-2%, you could take that mentality of, I'm a man up, work harder, add more hours, whatever, and push through that and provide that life for your family. But as inflation starts to increase, you get 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, 10%, 15%. You literally can't do that, right? Because you are a limited human with finite resources in finite time. And so the only way to survive financially and in a way, like as a man in that scenario, is you got to whip up your Bitcoin sale and turn around and ride the inflationary current instead of trying to row against it.
Yeah. And that's a great segue into chapter 8, which talks about energy. And this chart here was really, really eye-opening. It's a chart about some nations and electricity and income per capita. And you probably won't be able to see it very well on the screen, but it's on page number 83 here. And you circled here, it says, no such thing as a low energy rich country. And when I read that, I go, wow, I knew that, but it was I never put it in those words and in that framework. And as I was reading this, I was going, man, these low energy, and I don't mean low energy like when Trump calls like Biden energy. I mean like anti-energy, let me maybe put it out, these anti-energy zealots in the climate cults are, the way I see it, is anti-human. So how would you respond to somebody in this anti-energy movement who says, look, we need energy for more important things. Bitcoin wastes energy that we could be using for more important things like humanitarian aid or you name it, whatever, ending maybe EV battery plants or something. I don't know. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, a lot of that stems from a misunderstanding of energy markets, how they work, and why energy is necessary. So I sort of led off that chapter with that chart, which I can't remember where I found it, but it's circulated a lot. And it really illustrates that energy is life, right? If you think about death, it's a lifeless body with no energy. It's not moving. It's not producing any energy. And so in order to have a high quality of living and a high quantity of living too, right? To live many years, you need energy production. There's another chart in that chapter which shows global energy production, and charted alongside it is lifespan. And it's 1 for 1, right? It's like the M2 and stock market chart, right? They're 1 for 1. Same with energy production and lifespan. And so in order to have all of these luxuries, air conditioning, cars, refrigeration, Zoom chats, right? You need to produce a lot of energy. And so I felt this was an area where I could really appeal to conservatives, and there was room for a coalition because the anti-energy climate fudsters have gone after Bitcoin, and they've gone after the right wing. They've gone after natural gas and coal and oil and those industries. And so there's definitely room for a coalition. And as far as this idea that Bitcoin wastes energy, right? What that argument fails to understand is that this is energy that otherwise would not have been produced. So if you are an energy producer, you face this challenge where demand is volatile. You don't know exactly how much will be demanded and when. You can guess, right? You can use analytics and sort of logic, and you can reason, all right, the hottest times of summer when everybody comes home from work and they're cooking, they're running their AC, they're washing clothes, etc., that's going to be your peak energy demand, right? But other times of the year, it's going to be a lot lower. Or maybe there's a blizzard and everybody's blasting heat, and you need enough energy to satisfy those peaks in demand. But if you're producing that level of energy all the time, you're literally wasting energy. You're losing money, you're burning resources, right? So you don't want this huge mismatch between energy production and then energy consumption. And so Bitcoin miners can step in and fill this gap, right? Because they are willing to and able to consume large quantities of energy at any time and any place, and then they can scale down their consumption with a snap of a finger, right? And there's not massive negative externalities. So if you think of other high consumers of energy, you have hospitals, and you don't really want hospitals to turn off during a blizzard or a heat wave, right? You've got, grocery stores, you don't want them to turn down either. You've got manufacturing plants, which you can't just shut off 5% of a manufacturing plant because it's one unit that works cohesively, but you can shut off 5% of the Bitcoin miners and then run the other 95%, right? Because they're fungible in terms of energy consumption. And so Bitcoin miners fill a much needed role for energy producers in that they give them assurance that, hey, anything I produce that's not demanded by residential or commercial communities, Bitcoin miners will buy all of it. But when demand does increase and I need to service real people with sort of more physical and immediate energy needs, the Bitcoin miners can immediately turn off. And they're oftentimes, one, contractually obligated to do so, and two, there's a natural free market incentive. So when demand for energy increases, energy prices increase. And if your energy price increases as a Bitcoin miner, you're going to be less profitable or even unprofitable. And so you're perfectly willing to turn off during those times. And so it's almost too perfect how Bitcoin and energy markets fit together.
Well, it sounds like a win-win-win situation for every party involved, including humanity, broadly speaking.
Right. Humanity wins. And one more point I'll throw in there to give a bone to the sort of environmentalists and the ESG people. Think about where solar and wind energy is produced. It's in these very remote locations where there's not civilization, right? And so there's no use in producing all this energy if there's no town or community to buy it. And to actually transport the energy, there's a lot of leakage. It's not very efficient. And so if you want these energy sources, you need someone who's going to buy it. That's not the government with subsidies and money printers, right? Bitcoin miners are the number one candidate to do that because they will go anywhere to buy energy as long as it's cheap. They're financially incentivized to do so. So whether you're pro, drive a diesel truck, gas guzzling, like oil and gas, ride or die, or if you're, a little ESG guy, I want wind and solar and all this stuff, like Bitcoin mining fits both of those narratives. And so it's really uniting in that regard. And so and that's why I specifically wanted to work in Bitcoin mining as an industry. It's very revolutionary, and it's going to increase the quality and quantity of human life.
Amazing. That's that's the best answer I've heard to that question. So thank you for that. That's gonna, Lord willing, help a lot of people dispel the FUD around this. So one final question here I'd like to ask you before we wrap up. If you could have a room full of demoralized young people who are in your age demographic, that are struggling right now, that are, like I said, demoralized, they don't see a future, they're just in a spot where they think, man, I don't really know if I can continue here, what would you say to them at all, whether it's about Bitcoin or anything? How would you instill hope in this generation that, objectively speaking, right now seems hopeless?
Take action. So when I found myself demoralized and quote unquote depressed, I don't like that word, I think it's oversaturated, but it stems from a lack of inaction and almost this defeatist, nihilistic attitude that no matter what I do, things aren't going to get better. And that's just wrong. There objectively are things you can do to increase your physical, mental, and spiritual health. Literally read the Bible, whether you're Christian or not, like just read it. All right. There's wisdom there. It's the divine inspired word of God. And so filling your soul with that is going to do wonders for you. Lift weights, like eat healthy, do basic things to take care of your body, go outside and get sunlight, right? Build skills, do something in your free time that's not just mindlessly consuming, right? Produce something, write a book like I did. Like you don't even, nobody has to read it, right? Just write, just be creative in a way, and just literally get off your butt and go do something, find things you enjoy, pick up, like go hobby shopping, right? Find something you're interested in, boxing, surfing, fishing, golf, whatever it is, like it doesn't matter. Find things you like to do and then go do them and enjoy the little things in life. And once you're sort of dialed in on a day-to-day basis, over time that sort of compounds, right? If you get 1% better at life every day, that compounds over a 4 or 5 year period. Your life's going to look a lot different than it once did. And that's worked for me. I didn't necessarily conjecture that thought and like, this is what I'm going to do a few years ago, but that's sort of what happened. And when I look back, I'm like, wow, focusing on sort of day-to-day activities and just taking action and doing what you can to improve your life, and not waiting for some magic fairy to wave a wand to make your life better, whether that you think that fairy is the government or just anything, right? You just don't sit around and wait for your life to get better. You have to just go and make it better.
Mitchell Askew, thank you for letting me ask you these questions. And for those listening and watching,
thanks for having me on, brother.
I had that line cocked and loaded this whole time. I was just waiting for the end. Go and get the book, The Conservative Case for Bitcoin. You can get it on Amazon.com.ca, all of the Amazon marketplaces. It is priced at $17.76. I'll let you figure out why that might be. Again, thanks for coming on. Links will be in the description for you to go follow Mitchell and to purchase this great resource. Thanks again for being on.
Thanks, brother. I enjoyed it.
Bitcoin Well is a non-custodial Bitcoin platform in Canada and the USA. That means every single Satoshi you buy goes straight to your self-custody. They offer free withdrawals, a simple 1% spread, and they have the Bitcoin Wishing Well, where you can win up to 1 million Satoshis by earning points and throwing the coin in the well. In fact, you get 5 coin tosses to the Bitcoin Wishing Well when you sign up at bitcoinwell.com/pastorcoin.